Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
You get your slides up.
Yeah, I'll work on doing that now.
Our lunch is running late, so. This is Saranya. She is one of our officers for the
Hello.
PDA.
Nice to meet you, Stranya.
Can you take just these chairs? Just kind of roll them like against the wall over there. Those are fine right there. I just need enough room. Is it just taking a minute?
Yeah, it takes a long time. This computer's just very slow.
Because I always need a reminder.
Yeah,
What should go where?
it looked like someone was running out of here pretty quickly, so.
Our lunch is running late. They're supposed to have it ready at like 11:15 and my student workers still waiting on it. So we may have to have people get food on their way out today.
Okay.
So if you'll just maybe let them know when you welcome them. They can get water and sign in, but it looks like the food won't be here. Food's running late, so help yourself to water and. Sure. Thank you.
Stacey, I think I got the screens all
Oh, good.
squared away.
Great.
I teach in here, so I know how
Yeah,
to
you know.
do.
Okay.
And we have people on Zoom and that's great teaching. So it's like I know how to do this
Good,
room.
good.
So
Wow.
that's good.
And you know how the microphones work and all of
Yeah.
that, so good. Well, Saranya has a couple of announcements and then she'll introduce you. So
Sounds good. Sounds great. So what other events have happened from this organization this semester?
Yeah, this semester, like we had that professional development day along with the graduate student
Oh, okay, that's great.
organization. Yeah.
That's great. And that was just recently, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. This is the first time like association with graduate student organization.
That's really nice. So was the Office of Faculty Development involved in that at all, or was
Yeah.
it sort of separate?
No, like Office of Postdoctoral Affairs and Postdoctoral Association and graduate student organization all three together.
Oh, okay. That's nice. That's really good. Very cool. Yeah, I gave a similar talk, but it was like 5 years ago.
Oh.
For the Postdoc Association. So
how long have you been here, Dr. Webb?
I've been here for 6 years. Yeah.
Like, so help yourself.
Almost 6.5 years. Yeah.
Did you start in Texas?
No, I am from Connecticut originally, and I did my graduate training at Yale and my postdoc at Yale, and then came here. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about like my progression through different phases of things also, because when I went to graduate school, I had no teaching experience at all and had to like sort of figure out how to get that.
This like very important thing, like you think going in the direction of academia.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna grab one of these water bottles. How are you doing? Hey. Good, how are you? Our lunch is running late, so grab yourself a water. Good. Right. I think you were the first one to sign up.
I just sent it to one of my grad students when I left David. So he's like,
Yeah,
I haven't got it.
He's going out to graduate.
He said he hasn't gotten it.
That's gonna come from the Office of Graduate Studies, and I think they're gonna send it out to faculty too, because we want them to come and see what it's gonna be about, so, yeah. It'll be good.
It will be good. Nothing else, start protecting my own time, to just get some writing.
And we have it for this, we're gonna do it 3 times a year, so it'll align with the each due deadline. Sure. And so this will start like that second Thursday in January, from 12 to 1:30. Yeah, that time, so it'll go January 12th through April 13th, I think, whatever those Thursdays are. So it'll be in this room. Nice. Yeah. That's very fun. Yeah. Everything okay with the wedding?
Two
and all
different-
that?
Yeah, fairly smooth. Caught COVID, so that was a bummer. Yeah.
When? Like right before the wedding?
It's right after, like at the wedding, I'm sure. So
Did you all have to travel? Did you?
yeah, we were supposed to like honeymoon, and then I was like, well, I guess we're not doing that.
Oh, no.
But no big deal.
Can you reschedule that?
We were gonna kind of like detour because we drove to Wisconsin.
Okay.
So we're gonna do like a little trek through like the Dakotas
Yeah.
and New Mexico
Yeah.
and do like some hiking and sightseeing and stuff. So it's fine.
Yeah.
But
At least you didn't have like plane tickets. You had to do it and stuff like that.
I was so disappointed.
Yeah. I would have to.
Going back to this in a month.
Yeah. Good.
Christmas. Yeah. 2 dogs now. So they'll
How do
be
they
coming
do it
with
in the
us.
car?
They're good.
Yeah. Ours doesn't really like to. She'll do it, and she doesn't. I can tell she doesn't like it. She's 10, and as she's gotten older, I've noticed that she just seems uncomfortable. Sure. Doesn't travel as much as she used to. Because we don't travel. Hello. Lunch is running late. It's on its way, so just sign in and grab water if you want it. I may have to just grab lunch on the way out. So. So Rania, I'm gonna go up and meet my student worker with the food, just to kind of get it going. You can start whenever you're ready. It's almost noon, so. Or if you want to wait a few minutes for a few more people to come in, you're welcome to do that too.
Howdy, everyone. This is Saranya Kannan, Secretary of Texas A&M Health Postdoctoral Association. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this month's Postdoctoral Association seminar. Before introducing the speaker, I would like to remind you all that we are receiving applications for postdoctoral awards, and we are offering 2 $500 merit-based travel awards and 1 $500 merit-based professional development award. And the last date for applying is on like December 2nd, and you can find further details on the website. And now it is my privilege to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Lara West. She is assistant professor from Department of Microbial Pathogenesis and Immunology. And Dr. West got her PhD from Yale University, and she did her postdoctoral training in Yale University. Before coming to Texas A&M Health Science Center, she taught biology, biochemistry, pathology, and immunology courses at Southern Methodist University and Yale University. And she also worked with Teach for America on STEM instruction at K2 level. And she is involved in the curriculum of immunology for first-year students at Texas A&M Health School of Medicine. And her pedagogical interest also includes flipped classrooms, active learning, and pure learning. And today she is here to give us a seminar on becoming an educator. Without any further ado, I would like to request Dr. West to take over.
Great, thank you, Sarana. So for those of you who came a few minutes later, there is lunch coming, but it might come after the seminar, I was told. So just if we're expecting lunch, I think it's on its way. It was just late. Thank you very much for inviting me to come give this talk. So I am going to be talking about, I titled this Becoming an Educator, but I think it's about learning how to teach and all of that. But I actually think that most, if not all, postdocs are teaching all the time, even if they're not necessarily standing in front of a classroom or developing a course. There's a lot of training and educational work involved in being a postdoc. And I think what I wanted to focus on was how all of you can leverage that when you're applying for the jobs that you one day want to get, how you can really formally explain your educational experience, even if you've never actually stood in front of a classroom and delivered an entire lecture, or because it can be, as I'm sure you're all aware, it can be actually very difficult to get those kind of opportunities. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on mostly today. In my teaching, I like to use this platform called Poll Everywhere, which is an audience response platform, and it's really good, especially when people are remote. So I see there's a few people on Zoom, and we have a remote location as well. So please, everyone can participate in this. You can either use your phone or a computer. If you just use your phone and text the word T-cell to the number 22333, after you do that, then you'll be able to put in an answer. But what I kind of wanted to kind of get everyone's read on this. So let's say, people do postdocs, they want to go into all different kinds of positions, but a lot of postdocs do want to become faculty members. So let's say, imagine yourself applying for a faculty position, and during the interview process, you're asked like, okay, what kind of teaching have you done? Oh, what's the first example that comes to your mind of something that you personally, you think that you have done? And if you feel like you've done none, then you can feel free just to say none. And I'll leave a minute for everyone to do that. I think it should be, responses should be coming in line. Okay, so I'm seeing mentoring grad and undergrad students. Yes, absolutely. That I'll talk more about that. I think that's absolutely a great way to talk about your teaching. And I think there are ways to actually document that in your CV and in any teaching statements that you have to do, which I'll talk about today. Let's see if I can make that not so huge. Okay, taught undergrad and postgraduate students in a classroom and a lab. Okay, so that's a much more formalized experience. So that would definitely be a great example to provide as a formalized teaching example. Anything else? All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. So one of the things that I want to talk about today are recognizing the teaching that you are already doing. Responses did come in a little slowly. That might just be because people are getting warmed up today, but I think it's also can be sort of difficult to think about all those examples of teaching and think about a way to document that in a meaningful way for a job application. And I think that there's, again, like I said, there's a lot of different examples of teaching that postdocs are doing all the time, just as part of your normal work, that can be sort of reframed and re-understood as formalized teaching. Then, of course, there are opportunities for formalized teaching, and I'll talk about a few of the examples that I know about that are out there that you could get involved in if that's something you want to do. And then finally, there, of course, are opportunities for professional development, which again can be documented, put on a CV, something that can be leveraged in a job interview or job application process. Okay, so I'll start with this. So recognizing the teaching that you are already doing. And so this was something that already popped up. A lot of people recognize that, training individuals, which is part of being a postdoc, being a senior member of your laboratory, is just something that you have to do a lot. So you're teaching people in your laboratory, undergraduates, graduate students, sometimes other postdocs, people from other labs. This is a teaching that is going on all the time. It's not something that takes you out of lab, it's part of your work in the lab, right? And then actually presenting and explaining data, the skills that you develop when you're doing informal presentations, so lab meeting or presenting one-on-one, as well as formal presentations, doing posters, RIPs, and seminars, that in a way, people often don't think of this as teaching, but essentially all teaching is explaining something to someone so that they can understand. And oftentimes it's something they're not familiar with. And I'm sure you've all experienced presenting data in your departments or in other departments, and you can tell that there are people in the audience who are confused, right? Or that it's not their area of expertise, and you have to explain that. And that is the process of teaching. So if you can present your data, then you can teach. Okay, so I want to start with talking about training individuals. So I want everyone to hear and remotely to be thinking about, is there a technique in which you are the designated expert in your laboratory? Okay, so certainly postdocs and advanced graduate students, usually there is something that you are like the go-to person on. Is there a technique that you've taught to many people? Often those are the same things. Are there techniques in your lab that you have developed and moved forward? So your PI saying, hey, can we figure out how to do this thing? And then they sort of look pointedly at you and you realize that you're the one who has to figure it out. And then you've done it and developed and moved it forward. So can everyone just brainstorm for a moment, and I want to hear some experimental techniques in which you consider yourself an expert, or that your PI considers you to be an expert in. Okay, we'll go with these two responses. Okay, so I see Western blotting and flow cytometry and seahorse assays. And cloning. Okay, great. So yeah, definitely some very clear techniques, clear ideas for things that you're an expert in. As a postdoc, you're in the lab all the time. You definitely are becoming an expert in some, or already are an expert in some experimental techniques. So in terms of marketing yourself and framing yourself as an educator, you can take these techniques and use them. So one thing that you can do is you can write up a formalized module for training. So for example, I'll go with the flow cytometry example because I'm the director of the flow cytometry core here. I'm sure you all know that Robbie Moore, who's the manager of the flow core, she has written up these modules. She uses PowerPoint, she uses screenshots and images. She takes things from other places you may or may not be aware, educators actually steal a lot of things, resources from other places. It's just part of the educational process. It's actually encouraged, whereas in a lot of fields that sort of thing is not. So she writes up these modules, and they're just PDFs that she keeps on her computer, and she provides them to people. And so it's a document that she can use to teach people how to do things. So it makes her work easier, right? Because then if someone comes to her and says, can you teach me how to do this? She can give them that, work through it with them. That makes it better. But then that's also a document that you can say, this is mine. I've generated this. I've produced this. This is a part of my teaching portfolio that I have developed a teaching module for people in my lab. It's formalized. Rather than just saying like, oh yeah, I've trained a bunch of people to do flow cytometry. You actually have a document that proves that you've done it and that you put that intellectual work into developing it. So you can use existing training documents as a guide if you're sort of like, I'm not really sure how to go about doing this. Find something that you have used to train yourself or been trained with and use it as a framework. And this is something that can be presented. So, there are, like for something, even like this postdoc association, you could say like, this is something that I've done. I'd like to present it to other people. So you can actually say like, put on your CV, like I presented this module in this way. If you're part of like an organization that like a society based on your field of study, that's something you could potentially submit. There are often like educational committees that you could submit to. Just having something that's documented on your CV. I developed this, I taught it, and I've presented. I've done like some scholarly work around it. Just really boosts that feeling that you are an educator. You will be able to come in and be a teaching faculty if needed. You can also publish some of these things. So depending on how far you go with something, there are like online repositories for teaching materials for different things. Some of them are peer reviewed even, so you can get an additional publication just based on the education and training work that you're doing. And then, as I mentioned, this can be added to your CV as an educational component. We can take like a 5-minute break for people to get lunch. That would be fine with me.
If you're okay with that.
Yeah, we definitely have the time, so we can just take a 5-minute break.
Yeah, so sandwiches are here. There's a variety, including vegetarian, and we're just waiting on chips, cookies. My student workers still heading in. So, or you can get it on your way out, whichever.
Yeah, or if you want to get up at any point, just go get a sandwich. It's fine with me. Okay. Do people want to get up? You can just vote with your feet and just get up. Sandwich.
I'll get a sandwich.
Yes. I'll pause just for a second.
This first box is vegetarian.
Extra. So I didn't sign up for the food.
Yeah, I ordered enough for a few extra people. what you have.
It's
Good to
just
know.
getting sent back to me.
Okay.
You're not actively ignoring.
All right, thank you. Some people don't have service at like this level, but some
Yeah.
people do.
I don't have it upstairs either.
Are you talking about internet or phone?
The website, I couldn't get the work.
Yeah, those are great questions, 'cause like I TA'd once for a giant class, 2 professors. I did no teaching, I did, so my office hours were always slammed with people, and that's where I did my teaching. So how to kind of tell people that,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's another example where you could potentially think about when students came to you, was there a certain question that they would ask a lot or a topic they had trouble with? And then you could try writing up like a study guide for that and then say like, this is my document that showed that I developed to teach these students this. Like,
that's a good idea.
you can always spin some sort of, because you always are actually doing that. It's just a matter of like making like a formalized, like, here's my document, and I'm just gonna call it like the study guide for protein translation or whatever it was that you were studying them or teaching them, that is, and then that just helps document it.
Yeah, kind of like topic oriented, because there were, when you say that, there were specific topics that they needed
Yeah.
help with all the time.
Yeah, some of the best advice I got when I was a graduate student was I was writing up a teaching statement, and I TA'd a lot, and I would be like, oh, I was an assistant teacher for this, an assistant teacher for that. I was talking to the woman at the teaching center. Stop saying that, like you're teaching it. Like you are teaching these things. Like don't, like when you're showing someone how to do something, that's teaching. So you can just say that you're teaching it.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it was very helpful. Okay, all right, so everyone's settled, we'll start again. Okay, so that was the idea that, as postdocs, you're always training people, you're always, working with personnel in your lab, personnel in other labs. Just think about what you're doing and just write up a document, again, that can be documented in your CV, and that it could also be potentially presented and published, which just continues to add to, building up that teaching element of your CV. Okay, another way to do this, as I mentioned, is presenting and explaining your data. So, consider the field in which you work and how you present the background for your project during your presentation. So like I mentioned earlier, we're all in departments that have people who have different, they're grouped into a department, but there are people in departments that have different expertise. You're always going to have to do some sort of background for what you're presenting. I'm just going to go ahead and skip ahead because people told me they were having some technical issues with this, but just, think about the scientific topic in which you consider yourself an expert. Think about your thesis, things that you've written reviews about. If you assisted with writing with manuscripts, writing the introductions, you are an expert in that field now. So how would you turn that information into a lecture or even an entire course? Like think about that. If you put yourself in the shoes of like a faculty member who goes to a university or college and is told by your department head, like, we really need a course on this. Can you develop that? How would that work? What would that look like for you? Or just one, I would actually recommend with just starting with one lecture. How would you give a lecture? How would that work? And go ahead and just make that lecture. Because then that's something that you can say, I've developed a lecture on whatever it is that you work on. And that's true, you actually have the slides, you're already ready to go. And then you can just see what that's like to make a lecture if you have not done that before. So as I mentioned, develop a lecture. One thing that can be very helpful is if you are on the job market and starting to apply for some jobs, look at the university that you're applying to and sort of see what courses do they have, where might your lecture that you're developing fit, what kinds of classes might it fit into, so that if you say, oh yeah, I've developed this lecture and I think it could really fit well into this course that you already have, that's always very nice. And then, you know, go ahead, as I mentioned, go ahead and make that lecture and just see what that feels like, and think about time, the audience that you would be delivering it to. So if it's an upper level graduate course, you know, it could be potentially something that's 2 hours long and maybe has a lot of like active discussion components to it, references a lot of primary literature. If it's something like introductory course for undergraduates, it would be, you know, maybe 1 hour to an hour and a half, and you know, have to really do a lot of background work, making sure that the students are brought up, you know, to speed. They obviously have a much more basic understanding. And then you can also try to think about developing a whole course and what that might look like. You know, what courses might be needed at the university that you're applying to. Develop a syllabus. You know, using the format that's used at the university of interest. If you can get that information, that's always really helpful. Developing a syllabus is one of those things that is not difficult to do, but it's just a lot of work. It just takes a really long time. It's not hard because you're just typing in like this would go here and that would go there, but it does take some time. And so going through the process of doing it, even again, it might seem sort of silly, like why am I doing this for some potential course that doesn't even exist? But being able to say, I have actually developed a course and a syllabus based on my expertise in blah, 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 blah. That's something you could put onto your CV, you can talk about, and it positions you as an educator. And then actually probably the most important thing is if you do this, get feedback from other faculty members. So nothing is more helpful than talking to someone who's been teaching for 30 years and they know every single line in the minefield and can just say, oh yeah, that might actually be a problem, or have you thought about this? And you're gonna probably wanna have someone who has expertise in this come in and give those lectures. It's really, really helpful to just learn from colleagues. And those colleagues like to be tapped for their expertise. And so it helps build some of those collegial relationships. And then if you ever need a letter of support from someone to talk about what a good educator you are, you can always tap them to do that for you as well. So that's, again, a way to just build that portfolio, build that aspect of your CV and professional identity. Again, developing these educational materials is something that can be presented and published and added to your CV as an educational component. Again, you're just making documentation of something. Now, developing a course and a lecture is probably something that is not just naturally happening as part of your work as a postdoc. So this is something that you would have to be doing on top of all your responsibilities as a postdoc as well. But it can be a very helpful exercise and, again, be very bolstering to your CV. Okay, so that sort of sums up recognizing the teaching you're already doing. You might be a postdoc who really focuses primarily or totally on research. Most postdocs are. So it can be difficult to sort of know, like, how do I add teaching on top of all the things I'm already doing? So I really encourage you to mind what you're already doing to strengthen those teaching components of your CV without actually having to formally teach a course, which takes you out of lab, can be very challenging to do, can be very hard to get your foot in the door. Are there any questions on this aspect of what I've talked about?
Yeah. Is there anything that you like recommend putting like on your CV, like don't put on like your teaching portfolio or vice versa?
It depends on what kind of job you're applying for. So if you are applying to a faculty position that is really at a like primarily research focused place, then your research that you've done is always going to be the most important thing. And that's not to say that like teaching just does not matter at all, but your teaching is not going to get you that job. It's going to be your research. I think what they would want to see is someone who's been very successful, very good in research, and then also could take on a few lectures to relieve the burden on other people. So would know how to teach some things. So being able to say like, oh yeah, you know, like I made this teaching document for my students. And I also, you know, I made this lecture about my research. And so I can be tapped to do that if needed. but you don't like overemphasize that too much, because you really, the research is really the important thing. But I think you want to show that you would be capable of teaching if needed. If you're applying to a teaching heavy university, so like a small, maybe undergraduates only college, where you would maybe be doing like, you'd have to teach a lot, maybe teach like one or two courses a semester maybe, then you're gonna wanna emphasize like the entire course, not just one lecture. That's when you would wanna emphasize a lot more like, oh, I've done lots of teaching, but I've also been successful in research, but I can absolutely develop an entire course and, deliver it. And then you wanna emphasize that more. And then certainly if you're going into a lecturer position or something like that, where it's 100% teaching, then of course you wanna be able to talk about your teaching a lot. So it's really depends on what kind of position you're going into. But it's never going to be completely out of the equation if you're going to an academic center, because there's always going to be, we need someone to teach this, who's gonna do it? So then you wanna be able to show that you can be that person. So please hire me, right? Any other questions? Okay. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about opportunities for formalized teaching. So these can actually be pretty tricky for postdocs. They certainly were when I was a postdoc. So as a future faculty member, as I was just mentioning, you'll likely be asked to contribute at least some lectures to graduate and medical school courses. Maybe that's it, maybe just a few lectures here and there. As I mentioned, if you're in a really research intensive place, but it can be all the way up to 100% teaching, depending on what kind of school that you're looking at. So even if you're at a very research intensive place, having some level of teaching is important for promotion packets and receiving documented student feedback. It's not, I really think it's very rare at most research intensive places that like it would make or break your tenure if you've been very successful in your research, but you need to at least show like I've done some teaching. It's just part of your service to the university as a faculty member to do some. And for some people that's like I teach 2 lectures in 1 course a year and that's it. Or I do like a graduate student seminar and just like talk about papers with graduate students. And so for most jobs, they do want to see, they want to see some documentation of teaching. And I've offered some ways to do that so far, but as far as like very formalized things, it can be very hard to find opportunities to lecture as a future faculty member. So as a postdoc, as I'm sure you are all aware, if you've tried to do it, it's hard to find like that you can lecture as a postdoc. That's not an easy opportunity to find, because most faculty are actually looking for those opportunities so that they can get it for their promotion packets. So what are you to do? If you're a postdoc and you want some more formalized teaching, how do you find these opportunities? So the first thing that I would recommend is to seek out and get involved in active learning activities. So anything in which there are lots of small groups of students. So a lecture where there's a didactic style teaching where like I'm doing right now, where it's just one person standing in front of a big group of people, the ratio is that there's one person, right? So it's pretty hard to find those opportunities because that one person is going to be a faculty member in most cases. But there are active learning activities where there's lots of group of students, and I can tell you as a faculty member, in most cases, they're always looking for people to actually teach these, because you get like 10 faculty who want to be involved, but there's 16 student groups. How do you fill that gap? So this is always a great opportunity to get involved in these. So for example, I run a program at the medical school called the Clinical Synthesis and Integration Exercise Program. So these are monthly activities with the medical students where there are small groups of students, between 14 and 16 medical students, and they go through clinical cases. And these are facilitated by one clinical faculty member and one basic science faculty member. And so the clinical faculty member provides all that clinical expertise. Oh yes, this is the differential diagnosis, and this is, what I would do if a patient came in with this, and blah, 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 blah. And then the basic science faculty member says, oh yes, and actually lupus is caused by this immune process, and can talk about that from a basic science standpoint. So this is a really great way to get involved. We actually have all the clinical faculty we need, but we are always looking for basic science faculty or basic science expertise. I run this program, I would be very happy to have postdocs get involved in this. Another example would be laboratory courses, which I think was one of the things mentioned at the beginning. Someone said that they were involved in these. Again, you have lots of groups of students, and you need lots of people to get involved in these and make sure that the students are doing the right thing and are being supervised in a laboratory setting. Very important. So this is another potential way of getting formalized teaching experience. And then discussion sections as well are potentially a way to get involved. These are often headed up by graduate teaching assistants, but I think reaching out to a faculty member who's in charge of one of these things and talking with them, I think there could potentially be a way for a postdoc who's really interested in teaching to get involved as well. There are also opportunities for formalized teaching outside of the university. So there's always community-based teaching and science outreach opportunities. So one example would be libraries and community centers. They often look, if you develop sort of a lecture on something and you can make it applicable to a lay audience, you could potentially reach out to people running these organizations and ask, like, can I give a lecture? Or can I give a talk about something that might be of interest? You might be teaching like 3 retirees and that's it, right? And one might fall asleep or something like that, but you still can actually document, like, I developed this and I taught it to people in the community. Okay, so those are my examples of formalized teaching opportunities. Question in the back?
I just wanted to mention that I know that recently Lynn and Brenham, especially possibly and Brian as well, was also looking for lecturers in the sciences specifically recently. And they specifically said that welcome.
Oh, that's great. That's great to know. Yeah, so that's another example. So that's a community college, but definitely that's an academic setting. That would be like really like a gold standard. It certainly might take you out of the lab more than you might want to do. That's a big responsibility, but definitely a way to gain some of that experience. All right. And so another thing that might be very helpful, and again, could beef up your CV in terms of education, is professional development. So the A&M Center for Teaching Excellence on main campus has this program called the Academy for Future Faculty. So I had mentioned, making a syllabus and thinking about that. So they actually have this whole program. So this is from this fall. And these are all the courses that they have. So these are 5:30 on Wednesdays and Thursdays, it looks like. And they talk about, developing a CV, designing a syllabus, making a teaching philosophy statement, which is very difficult to do. It's really nice to get help with that kind of thing. How you do small group teaching, how you develop those transferable skills, all things that I think you could put on your CV that you graduated from this Academy for Future Faculty, which shows that you've gotten all this training, but then you get all this content and information, which can be very helpful as well. And I will make these slides available in PDF format, so this link will be clickable and you'll be able to go to this, but it's just right here, and you can, of course, Google this as well. But this is a great program. I did something very similar when I was a graduate student, which I'll talk about momentarily. And then there's, of course, professional development here at the School of Medicine. It tends to be sort of targeted at faculty, but I think postdocs could absolutely take advantage of these, and I think would actually be even just as beneficial to postdocs, if not more, than faculty. But if you're interested in getting involved in medical education, the Academy of Distinguished Medical Educators has a journal club. There are educational grand rounds where there are presentations on issues in education. And then there's a faculty development on-demand course catalog as well that you can do on your own time, and just look at that and see, I need some help with syllabus development, and they have all of that as well. And again, just any time that you want to access that, which makes it really, really accessible. And this is the website here as well. And again, even if you're just doing like an on-demand 1-hour class on, something, put that on your CV. That always document all of that on your CV. Okay, Any questions on professional development before I move forward?
Okay, I'll ask another one.
Yeah, of course.
I have my teaching philosophy that I'm putting in my faculty applications, but I haven't had an interview yet, but hopefully. But you typically, I say I could teach, interested in teaching these courses. They then say, we expect 10% of your time to be teaching, or say that, or like how do you decide based on need at a specific university, or is it like a universal 10% of your time is spent on service, 10% is spent on teaching?
Yeah, it sort of depends on the job description and what they're looking for what they need somebody to do. And that will be part of the discussion. So when you interview and you start to move closer to being hired, they might say something like, we really need someone to take over this course or develop this course. Do you think that's something that you could do? And then you could talk about, like, oh yes, I've done things like that, so I could do that. But the other thing about like FTE that is sort of tricky is that nobody ever like really checks. Like if you're supposed to be doing 25% of your FTE and you're doing none of it, then obviously people are going to notice. But like if you are spending like 20% of your time actually on the course, like if you're close enough, that's okay. But it's more that you get just assigned like some tasks to do in the educational realm, and then you just are expected to do those, and that hopefully it will match up as closely as possible with the FTE that you're supposed to be doing, and that you'll be able to balance it. And with teaching, the first year is always the hardest, and then it's a lot easier after that because you just have everything developed. But yeah, I mean, a teaching statement, just being able to talk about specific examples of things you've done before, so that then you can say, oh, well, as I said in my teaching statement, I've done these things, so I could do them here if that's needed. That's the way I would sort of think about it. But yeah, they'll let you know. And then sometimes you get surprised that you have to do something also after you've already taken the job. So, any other questions? So I just wanted to, I usually don't do this, but I think it actually applies very well here. I wanted to talk a little bit about the process by which my career progressed through all these stages, because I started as just interested in research, and then I changed over to education, and that is a career progression that I didn't have a ton of examples of, and so I just wanted to provide some of that to you all. So my career development was that I did my PhD training at Yale University in immunobiology. When I came in, I knew I was interested in teaching, but hadn't really thought about it a lot. Excuse me. And in fact, I had no educational experience when I matriculated. So when I started there, I never taught anything. Now, if I'm going by my model, I could say, well, actually, I taught people how to, do certain things. I'd been working in a laboratory before. I taught people how to do stuff there. I presented data, but I had never stood in front of a classroom and actually taught people. So at my university, I had to be a teaching assistant for 2 courses. It was required as part of my graduate training. And after I did those 2 courses, I continued and did 4 more because I realized I really, really liked teaching. And then I also made extra money from teaching, so that's also why I did it. But I liked it a lot. And so I had some formalized teaching experience from serving as a teaching assistant. And then another thing that I started doing is that for several years during graduate school, I volunteered as a science fair mentor at a 6th grade classroom in my community. And I really, really liked that because I used to steal like plasticware from my lab and like take it and let the kids like stick their fingers in like agar plates and do stuff like that. Don't tell my PI that I did that. But I did a lot of community teaching and I really, really enjoyed that. That was probably the most fun teaching I've ever done. And then because of this, I was like realizing like, oh, I really like teaching a lot. This is really the aspect of academic life that I really like the most. And so I was lucky that there was and continues to be a very excellent teaching center at Yale. And I completed 2 educational training programs. I did a future faculty program where I, learned how to make a syllabus and wrote a teaching statement and all of that stuff. Very, very similar to the one here at A&M. And then I also did an educational training program on active learning and small group learning and things like that, which was really nice. And that really introduced the idea of teaching as scholarly work to me also, that there were all these theories behind teaching. Again, like I said, people who have gone to school to be teachers, they knew all this already, but I did not, because I'd never taught before. And so I found that really fascinating, and I continue to like that. And then I also, I did some work for a textbook publisher based on this educational training work. I used to, like when you read a book chapter and there's like questions at the back, I like helped write some of those questions, and that was nice because I made a little extra money and it was fun work. And then I also did consulting work for Teach for America based on the science fair work I had done and the educational training work that I had done as well. I helped K through 12 teachers with some of the ideas that I had learned and learning how to teach K through 12 students. So I spent a lot of time as a graduate student, and this also went into my postdoc as well, doing a lot of teaching work. So based on this work, I accepted a lecturer position out of my postdoc. I was like, teaching, this is what I really want to do. I really want to do teaching. I want to leave the lab completely. I just want to teach. And be careful what you wish for. In my case, because I then got a job where I did 100% FTE teaching. I was a lecturer at Southern Methodist University, and this is a stock image, but the lecture hall where I taught actually looked very similar to that. And I taught a biochemistry lab for about 15 students. I taught biology for non-majors to about 100 students, and I taught introductory biology to over 200 students. So I went from sort of like, I was like the fun lady who came in and did science fair experiments with kids, and I was the teaching assistant where I just got to like hang out with students and like explain stuff to them, to like being dropped into 200 angry undergrads, like trying to teach, every day. It was very, very intense. And I also developed an immunobiology lab, which that was probably the most fun thing. Being able to develop a course from the ground up. That was really, really fun. But this was a very intense experience, just teaching all the time. And I found that I also, as you might predict from what I said earlier, I missed the creative pursuit of being in the laboratory. And also just for any of you who might know, 100% teaching faculty, it can be a very, like an underappreciated and overworked position. So for those of you who like follow any news about like academic jobs, like adjunct professors who just teach all the time, they're often like really, really, I was not an adjunct, I was lucky to have a lecturer position, real position, but it can be very intense, and having a lot of students, it was actually more work than being in the laboratory, which was shocking to me. And then just, it was different from what I expected it to be. The one thing I will say about it is that I feel like I can deal with like any teaching situation because I did this. It was just 1 year, but it was intense enough that I'm like, I did that, I can do anything. So that was my experience for a year. And then after that year, I accepted the position that I am in now at A&M. And I focus really primarily on medical education. I do some graduate education as well, but most of my time is spent teaching medical students. And so when I accepted this position, my teaching was really at the undergraduate level with very minimal K through 12 teaching. And so it was really, again, like sort of a shift in what am I doing? How do I teach medical students? How indeed do I even feel like I can teach medical students? I do not have an MD. I'm not a clinician, and I don't actually know very much about clinical work. And so the way that I've learned in this position is sort of on my feet, learning from colleagues, as I mentioned before, reaching out to other faculty, and learning from them has been very helpful. So I'm a co-course leader for a medical course and the longitudinal medical curriculum, the CSIE that I mentioned earlier. So that means I work with other people. I'm not the only course leader. When I worked at SMU, I was by myself. So it's really nice to work with somebody else and learn from them. And so that's been a really great experience. So that's the formalized teaching that I do. And I also have engaged in a lot of professional development here as well. So there, for medical educators, there's an institute at Harvard called the Harvard Macy Institute. And they have a training workshop in medical education. And I was lucky enough to be able to go to that. And that was really helpful. I did that in my first year here. And then I also served as a American Association of Medical Colleges Leadership Fellow and was able to learn again from colleagues and just engage in some of that professional development. Professional development is very, very, very helpful. Sometimes you get those, and I know that your organization did a professional development day, which is great. Sometimes you get those emails and you're just like, I'm too busy to do this. Like, I don't have time. Do I really need to learn about like how to be a leader? But actually all of those things have been very, very helpful. It really is worth the time to attend those seminars, to really think about these things and develop yourself professionally. And as I mentioned, learning and seeking help from colleagues has been very helpful. All right, so that is sort of my process here of how I moved through all these steps. I sort of continue to try to learn how to do things. My professional identity continues to sort of change. I became the director of the flow facility last year, and so I'm still feel like I'm learning how to do that. And there's a lot to learn there. So the thing that I would just recommend to all of you is that it's always really just helpful to have a growth mindset in terms of developing professionally, but also how you market yourself and your expertise. For me, I tend to have a feeling of like, oh, well, I didn't really do that. And so I can't really put that on there, but just fight that feeling. Just be like, no, I am doing this. I have achieved these things. I am going to put them on my CV. And when someone asks me about teaching, I'll be able to talk really well about it. Even if, as a postdoc, I didn't develop my own course, I feel like I have the skills where I could do that as a future faculty member. So I'll be happy to answer any questions. If you want to ask me now, or I'll hang around for the next 10 minutes, I'd be happy to answer them. But thank you again for inviting me, and I hope that you've got some helpful things out of today's talk.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If the postdocs are interested in trying to find like a small group opportunity to teach, where would you recommend that they go? So like the medical sciences program director, or?
Yeah, I think asking, there are different leaders in different spaces. And so it sort of depends on like what kind of opportunity you would want, like what kind of students you might want to teach. But you could certainly talk to like your department head and just say like, hey, I'm interested in doing like some small group activities with medical students. Does anything like that exist? Or with graduate students, do you know of anything like that exists? Or even undergrads, and have them help you, point you in the right direction. Usually I find with education or anything in academia, if you are sort of like want to do something, if you ask one person, like, do you know who I can ask about this? You eventually get to the right person, because sometimes you have to go through a few people, but there's always someone who like knows of someone who knows of someone that needs help with something. So I would just, department heads are always a good place to start, because they usually have sort of a finger in everything that's going on.
Kind of on that topic as well, how would you go about finding who to talk to about like external opportunities? Specifically, like how you found the publishing company that you did that textbook work with? Yeah, and I thought, I was like, someone might ask me about that, and I don't remember how I got in touch with those people. I think it might have been like, because I was involved in some other things. I think it was sort of like why I was just saying someone had asked somebody else, like, do you have anyone who would want to do this? And then so it's sort of like if you start getting involved in stuff, then like all these other opportunities open up, because people are always looking for people who are willing to
do these things, but I don't think I've reached out to anyone to get that. And I'm not sure. I mean, you could potentially look at publishers' websites and see if you could find like any editors and just email and say like, I would be willing to do some freelance work if there is anything, and just put your name out there and see. LinkedIn also might be actually a good way to do that, to like look at some textbook publishing houses and maybe like see if you can connect. Because if you have a university attached to you, then you're not like just a random person. Like you're connected with a university that gives you a certain level where you can just sort of get your way in that way. Yeah. So that's what I would recommend. I'm sorry, I don't have anything more clear than that.
The active learning courses you have been mentioning, like whether we need any experience to like come and participate or like teach.
So for the CSIE for the medical students, we have like a training that my co-director, Dr. Ronnie Kennedy, and I give to people who want to get involved in it. Which, you know, we just have like a Zoom meeting where we talk about like, here's the format, here's how it works, this is what you can expect. This is what we hope that you'll be able to do in terms of like coming in, and because they're always on Wednesdays from 8:30 to 10:30, not every week, they're like about once a month. And then we have like a whole training module in terms of content for each session. So like for me, I think I taught all of them. I certainly don't have like, for example, like expertise in like the integument musculoskeletal system, but we have a module that's been written that provides all the background for the facilitators. So I always just read through that and then I'm like, oh yeah, I know about myosin, so I can talk about that. And so that's the process by which we do that. So you do not have to have any experience. You just have to, you know, feel like you would be comfortable helping students through it and talking through the questions and things like that, and be willing to do the training and all of that stuff.
So should we approach, like, should we mail you or like?
Yeah, you can email me. Yeah, that would be a perfect way to do that. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, great. Thanks, everyone. I hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Your life experience, like career path, like you explained that is.
Thank you. Thanks again.
I'm trying to balance too much. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why having like, you know, having a document or something like that is helpful, because then it makes it feel more real, and it's like, it feels like it's something you can write down, as opposed to just like, oh, I taught people in the lab how to do PCR.
Okay.
Being able to say like, you know, I wrote this training document, and even maybe like, you know, having that in a teaching portfolio. So you would have to look into, so I only really know about medical teaching, because that's the space I've been in, but like, for example, for medical teaching, there's this thing called Med Ed Portal, and it's like a big online repository where people can say, hey, I developed this lecture for medical students and I'll just put it up there. Anybody can use it. And you can actually say like, I published on Med Ed, because it's peer reviewed. Before they post it, other people look at it. And so I don't know if things like that exist for other like fields of study or anything like that, but it's very possible that they do. And you could always, if you develop something and you presented it like here, for example, you could always include that in your like presentation section of your CV. Like, I presented this learning module that I developed to the postdoc association, or something like that. Like, there's always a way to kind of make it feel a little more formal. And it, you know, it's.
I wonder if the association could have sessions, maybe that could be something that we do, like
Yeah.
maybe quarterly or something where people.
Great
practice.
Thank
for
you.
you.
If you want a
I'll
different size,
tell
just
you.
come by my office.
No, that's
Not
medium's
elevator
perfect.
pitch, but maybe one lecture on what you're doing, right? So we get to know each other as well.
Yeah.
Just be nice, and then that's a formal thing. If we
Right, absolutely, saying that you presented it there, because it's still, maybe it's not presenting it at like some big meeting or something like that, but it's still, you're putting the effort into making the presentation, giving the presentation, organizing the meeting, like, it's just showing that you are a productive person who can see something through from start to finish.
Right.
And that's pretty valuable.
Yes, yes.
I want to thank you right now. I appreciate my PI. Every time I make a change in something, because they've been doing things forever, so it's kind of clunky and slow. I write it up officially, the lab protocol. I get one idea, he doesn't want to hear it, so it was rough at first, I like just ideas. He's like, I don't even, he just kind of felt like, but that he wants it all written up as a proposal.
Yeah.
So everything, I've got
Thank you.
documentation, so I was like, first, now. It's my business. It was
Yes,
great. I'm
I woke up this morning, I was like,
I'm in nutrition, I don't know if the CSI has a nutrition component.
It does, I think, and we actually have a medical school block called GI Metabolism and Nutrition. So we do have a nutrition block. Unfortunately, the CSIE is coming up the week after Thanksgiving, so I don't think the timeline would be a little too tight,
Yeah.
but certainly maybe next year. But there's always a way to sort of show some. Cause yeah, it's hard as a postdoc.
I apologize, but there was no, like, this is why.
Yeah. Yeah, it's challenging. It's always hard, even after, many years of doing it, but.
And
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Have a good one.
Maybe I might have gotten there right when they finished the first 2 PDA hearing orders. Maybe the driver didn't show up today. There's like a sorted box of sandwiches if you want to take something to go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. See you later.
And if you want to just send me those slides, I'll send them.
Oh, yes, I will. Great idea. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. You too.
I don't think so.
You're gonna have time to go to your thing?
I just make a comment.
Great, well, thank you. To you too.
Your meeting has ended.